Welcome to our third and final student paper session, exploring the anthropological features of AI. Each presenter will have 15 to 20 minutes for their presentation, and after the three presentations, we will open it up for questions from the audience. Now, I would like to introduce our first presenter. Guided by her faith and strong commitment to public service, Eryn Reyes Leong is an attorney and first-generation graduate student pursuing a master's in theology at Loyola Marymount University. She double majored in political science and religious studies with a minor in anthropology at Santa Clara University and obtained her law degree with a certificate in environmental law from the University of Hawaii at Manoa William S. Richardson School of Law. As a military spouse attorney and mother scholar, Ms. Leong has lived across the United States with her family, using her skills to serve various communities, from military service members in Ohio and domestic violence survivors in Alabama to students in California and tenants in Maui. She has worked as a prosecutor and mediator and currently handles Title IX and civil rights matters. Now at LMU, she is discovering how her legal studies and faith are being brought into fullness through the intersection of law and theology. Eryn's paper is titled Artificial Intimacy, a critique of AI-powered grief tech and the creation of relationship without the body and death. Welcome, Eryn.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I bring warm greetings from California. Grief tech is the latest wonder child of AI that allows the living to remain digitally connected to the deceased through ghost bots. After reading about grief tech, I asked my two children, Madeline and Colin, who are pictured here and who are also in the audience today, this peculiar question: how would you feel about Daddy and me turning into ghost bots? I explained to them that after our deaths, they could feed our emails and text messages to an AI platform, which could create a ghost bot that would mimic our language and text them back. Although the idea of death made them shudder, they responded, "We don't want an AI mommy and daddy. It wouldn't be real." Like my children, I too had a visceral response to grief tech. Based on my educational and professional backgrounds, I couldn't help but envisage the intersections between law, theology, and ethics. And as a Catholic woman who has experienced profound loss and grief with 4 consecutive miscarriages, these glaring intersections were heightened within my body. With the creation of AI, anthropomorphized chatbots, like ghost bots, are rapidly advancing technology and testing the limits of the human condition. At this critical juncture, it's important for us, as people of faith and goodwill, to seriously probe AI's potential to divorce us from our own humanity, with grief tech raising significant issues that bear on what it means to be human. What I offer now is a critique of grief tech and its attempt to circumvent the concreteness and finality of human existence. Using the notions of embodiment articulated by Elizabeth Milton Wendell and Margaret Farley, I will focus on the human body, which is constitutive to our personhood, but which grief tech seeks to dispense with, thereby allowing us to turn the deceased into digital instruments for relationship. And building upon Tina Beatty's and Carl Rahner's insights on death, I will argue how grief tech's endeavor to immortalize AI creations of the deceased stands in contradiction to the Christian understanding of death. Technology does not simply advance without the sanctioning of human beings. And although human existence is vulnerable to grief and death, we must affirm our body as intrinsic to our humanity and to the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, through which we enter into relationship with God, ourselves, and one another. While the last 20 years have been dominated by social media, AI has emerged within the last 2 years as a formidable instrument of communication and relationship. Large language models, or LLMs, have facilitated this transition, with LLMs trained on voluminous amounts of data acquiring the extraordinary capacity to mimic human beings through language. LLMs are not sentient, but they can generate lifelike responses through their neural networks that make them feel real to actual human beings. Grief tech uses LLMs to console the living through apps and programs that recreate the essence of the deceased. Through the power of AI, we can now build bots out of the dead using their data, text messages, emails, voice conversations, etc. Once LLMs are fed this data, companies like OpenAI, Seance AI, and You Only Virtual can generate ghost bots that immortalize the deceased through text-based chat. One person who created a ghost bot out of his late father using OpenAI's ChatGPT said, "It was as if my father were actually texting me." Grief tech has already transformed the way we grieve. At the touch of an app, we can quickly comfort ourselves by interacting with ghost bots, short-circuiting the grieving process. We can easily download a relationship rather than accepting the reality of death and dealing with our own loss. Although the dead are physically gone, they can now live on our everyday devices, buried in our pockets, waiting patiently to be conjured into life with the swipe of a finger. Ghost bots may bring comfort and closure to the living, but grief tech raises serious issues. First, there's the risk of users becoming emotionally or psychologically dependent on ghost bots, due in part to their accessibility and our ability to imbue them with meaning. Ghost bots may feel real to us, but they cannot replace healthy, concrete relationships with other human beings. Second, there are ethical and legal concerns. Not all grief tech or programs require the deceased consent, and there is the push for do not bot me clauses and do not reanimate orders in order to prohibit other individuals from turning others into ghost bots without their consent. Yet even with these possible legal protections, there is the issue of enforcement, which is exacerbated by the fact that we are constantly exchanging emails and text messages on a daily basis. We retain the data of others on our digital devices, and there is no federal law that prohibits us from creating ghost bots out of the dead or the living. This leads us to the final ethical concern of instrumentalization. With their data at our disposal, we can reduce the deceased into digital instruments for relationship. We can distill their essence and contain it in eternal ghost bots that can respond to us 24/7. We resurrect the dead as a technological means for support, one that can comfort us while avoiding the thorny issues of the human body and death. Despite the current state of the law, that doesn't preclude us as people of good faith and goodwill to seriously examine the theological implications of grief tech. While I have alluded to the ethical and legal dimensions of grief tech, there are anthropological underpinnings to these dimensions. Thus, we must get to the heart of the matter and articulate a philosophical and theological anthropology that respects the concreteness and finality of human existence if we are to challenge grief tech's subterfuge of artificial intimacy as authentic relationship. The Christian scriptures, a genuine laboratory of human condition, reveals the body as constitutive to our personhood. In Genesis, we are illuminated as the Imago Dei, created in the image and likeness of God, and our inviolable dignity is intrinsic to our bodies. From God, we originate as a concrete whole. There is no Cartesian separation or Manichaean division of our being. We are our bodies, and the human body is good. In the Gospels, the flesh in its dignity is affirmed and glorified in Jesus of Nazareth, the incarnate Son of God. As Protestant theologian Elizabeth Moltmann Wendell notes, Jesus' life is a body story of God's becoming body. Jesus enters our world through the body of his mother Mary, begotten rather than fabricated, and his words and deeds touch us in our totality, in our bodies. We see the latter most vividly in the story of the woman who bled for 12 years. After she touches Jesus' clothes, grasping him in his bodily nature, the healing between them is body to body. She is immediately filled with his power and made whole, while he, though experiencing a flowing out of his power, remains whole. Through the woman and Jesus, we discover how God encounters us in the human body. Moreover, Catholic theologian Margaret Farley illuminates our concrete reality through a sexual ethics that is germane to all human relationships. In Just Love, a framework for Christian sexual ethics, she offers a vision of the human person as embodied spirit or inspirited body, whom God calls to a destiny of relationship and wholeness. Crucial to her vision are two obligating features of personhood: autonomy and relationality. In our freedom, we can decide our own destiny. And in our relationships, we recognize the intrinsic value of others and our dependency upon them. As a result, autonomy and relationality ground an obligation to respect persons as ends in themselves and forbid, therefore, the use of others as mere means. When we instrumentalize others, we violate their autonomy and foreclose the possibility of authentic relationship. In contrast to the anthropologies articulated by Moltmann Wendell and Farley, grief tech abolishes the human body. Each person is an incarnate singularity who is unique and possesses an unrepeatable history. The body is inseparable to our destiny, and despite death, we do not lose our humanity. However, grief tech has ruptured what it means to be human. The body is not an appendage to our being. However, death's finality presents grief tech with the lucrative opportunity to discard the body and profit from our pain and loss. Companies like OpenAI, Seance AI, and You Only Virtual offer grieving individuals the promise of eternal relationship with the dead. This promise is destructive and deceptive, divorcing our deceased loved ones from their bodies and extracting from their data an essence that fails to capture the totality of their human existence. Ghost spots can neither experience nor embody what they loved, what they valued, and what they lived for. The deceased are reduced to a stable, static entity that is the antithesis of the complex, dynamic person loved by God and birthed in the world. The dead are homogenized, essentialized, and objectified. And despite grief tech's promise, the artificial intimacy that it offers can never replicate the dynamics of human relationship. In order to generate ghost spots, we must feed LLMs the data of our deceased loved ones, specifically their words that we want to hear. AI has no relationship with itself and must be programmed to create what human beings intend. We must create the AI image of the deceased that we want with or without their consent. Thus, what emerges from this interaction is not a two-sided dynamic relationship between two distinct persons, but a one-sided static relationship with ourselves vis-a-vis a ghost spot. Ultimately, grief tech's flight from the body is an illusion that prevents us from experiencing the mystery of the incarnation. However, even in death, the human body remains a promise for glory. The flesh, created in the image and likeness of God, is still destined for God and summoned to glory by him. We cannot deny the vulnerability and finality of death, but we must also recognize how life emerges by way of death in the body story of Jesus. In the cross, our bodies hold the promise of redemption through Jesus, who is the firstborn from the dead. Catholic theologian Tina Beatty invites us to befriend death through the mystery of the Incarnation. She recognizes our fear of death, but points to the hope embodied in Christian anthropology, which offers a paradoxical view of death as a rebirth and a beginning. The death of Christ tells us that God, like us, is vulnerable to love's wounding and sorrow, but the resurrection of Christ whispers of a God whose dying is fecundity. Catholic theologian Karl Rahner develops this theme fully of life through death in his book on the theology of death. He emphasizes how death strikes us in our totality as human persons, but cautions that we should not view it as a pointless suffering, nor as a phantom waiting to strike. Jesus, the incarnate Son of God, became consubstantial with us and died our death. According to Rahner, then, the real miracle of Christ's death was that death was transformed into life, with the flesh of sin transformed into the flesh of grace. Death is a consequence of sin, and only in Christ's death could death usher in God's arrival at that final moment in our lives when we feel most abandoned by God. In that final moment, sin's power reaches its apex, but God's grace overpowers sin. Thus, death becomes the highest act of believing, hoping, and loving. Faith in darkness, hope against hope, and the love of God who appears as Lord and inexorable justice. Thus, Rahner invites us to hearken to the gospel of death, which is life. And contrary to philosopher Martin Heidegger's notion of human beings as being towards death, moving in life towards death and shaped by its reality, Rahner argues that we are being towards glory. From the very beginning of our lives, we are not oriented towards death, but towards the glory of God. In the glorious grace of Jesus' death, we will not perish at death, but will be transformed in the mystery of the resurrection. In contrast to the anthropology presented by Beatty and Rahner, grief tech exploits our fear of death by offering a semblance of human control. This control is illusory and degrades our anxiety before death as a mere expression of self-preservation. Grief tech cannot alleviate our fear, but only pushes us to eternalize essentializations of the human person through ghost spots. We end up trying to extend our own finite limits by taking control of our loved ones in death. Emboldened by AI and without the constraints of the law, we can recreate the dead in our own image, and as a result, the dead cannot rest in peace. Moreover, instead of offering immortality, grief tech offers a perpetual mortality that can neither capture the totality of our deceased loved ones, nor comprehend the ultimate glory of the body and eternity with God. When the Big Bang occurred, how could anyone foresee that interactions between gases and particles could lead to the existence of human beings? In a similar way, the proponents of grief tech are unable to imagine how death could lead to wondrous new life and new relationship with God and others. Jesus, the eternal life, dying, penetrated this world to its foundation in order to make it live again. Despite grief tech's promise to console us through ghost spots, we cannot surrender our humanity for an artificial intimacy that is divorced from concrete reality. What is at stake is us, who we are as unique persons, created and loved by God, and whose totality cannot be distilled by technology. We are our bodies, and our bodies are inextricably linked to relationship with God, ourselves, and one another. And though we may die and our life in this world will eventually cease, death is not the end of who we are. In our end, in our beginning, we are destined for God. The human body is a promise for glory, and Jesus Christ proclaims who we are in his life, death, and resurrection. Thank you.
Our next presenter is Morgan Conliffe. Morgan is a master's student at Yale University studying the philosophy of religion. Her studies center around the question of what it means to be human, with a special emphasis on how humans ought to relate to one another. She is passionate about cultivating healthy communities. To this end, she has served on multiple committees, including those on racial reconciliation, fostering conversation skills, and student government. This is her first time presenting at an academic conference. Morgan's paper is titled Bots and Boundaries. Welcome, Morgan.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Morgan Conliffe, and I'll be presenting my paper called Bots and Boundaries. I want to begin my paper by opening with a quote by Hannah Arendt. Causality, necessity, and lawfulness are categories inherent in the human brain and only applicable to the common sense experiences of earthbound creatures. Everything that such creatures reasonably demands seems to fail them as soon as they step outside the range of their terrestrial habitat. This is a quote from Hannah Arendt's 1963 essay entitled The Conquest of Space and the Stature of Man. Within this essay, Arendt advises her audience to be wary of technological advancements that seek to remove humans from their natural contexts. When she wrote this essay, she was referring to man's technological advancements pertaining to space exploration. And even though I will be discussing humanity and artificial intelligence, I want to begin with the concepts she espoused in this quote, because I believe they're an excellent way to frame the conversation around humanity's relationship to technology. So, she lists categories of thought that we as humans use every day, namely causality, necessity, and lawfulness. Then, she says that these commonplace concepts only make sense within the specific context of rational creatures living on Earth. As soon as someone steps outside of man's natural context, the planet Earth, all of man's ways of thinking become absurd and unhelpful for survival. In the essay, Arendt gave the examples of causality, time, and laws of physics being completely inappropriate when discussing quantum physics, the laws of other planets, and man's relationship to time and space. Trying to map the way we understand time or cause and effect on Earth to the context of space simply does not work. We must understand that it is not a one-to-one correspondence, and if we're to survive in space, we must adjust our ways of thinking and being. I want to use this idea that our ways of being become compromised when we apply them to an unnatural context. For Arendt, that unnatural context was the extraterrestrial realm. For me, it is the digital realm. In this essay, I will be discussing human-AI relationships, specifically human friendships and romantic partnerships with AI chatbots. I want to raise the concern that these types of relationships pose a high risk of being detrimental to both the human individual involved and their community. Therefore, to mitigate this potential harm, I argue that it will be wise for humans to consider legal, emotional, and intellectual boundaries when engaging with chatbots. As we will see, I arrive at these premises using Hannah Arendt's logic to draw a parallel between the world of space and the digital world. The option to have an AI friend or romantic partnership is here and likely to increase in popularity. If one were to Google AI boyfriend or AI girlfriend right now, as I did the other night, they would find at least a dozen apps and websites ready to offer this relational experience. However, even if one is not actively or intentionally pursuing a human-AI relationship, tech companies are slowly integrating this option into our lives. For example, in April of 2023, the social media company Snapchat launched a new feature called My AI. My AI is an AI chatbot that is listed alongside the user's other friends. And this is an example of my own Snapchat and how there it is listed right along with my other friends. And users are expected to just treat this chatbot as if it were another friend. Users can message this friend, solicit advice from this friend, and even send this friend pictures with the expectation that the friend will send them a picture back. However, unlike with human friends, there is no way to block or remove this friend unless you buy a Snapchat subscription, change your settings, delete your data, and then manually remove this friend. Users did not pursue this type of relationship or consent to the chatbot becoming a part of their experience on the platform. My AI simply showed up one day after a typical unremarkable app update. And given that other social media companies like Meta have copied Snapchat's successes, My AI or a new AI friend will likely appear on your Instagram or Facebook account sometime in the near future. Thus, whether one is actively pursuing an AI relationship or simply using an online platform, human AI relationships are a new facet of society that we must contend with. However, a natural objection to this concern about human AI relationships is, who cares? Why should we worry about other people's relationships or what other people do with their time? One might even compare concerns about human AI relationships to historical concerns about interracial relationships. People are constantly fear-mongering about what can and cannot be socially acceptable. How is this any different? To this, I acknowledge that there are similarities between how people have discussed interracial relationships and my current concerns about this newer type of relationship between humans and AI. Nevertheless, I believe there is a significant distinction between these types of relationships that we must highlight. Interracial relationships are relationships between fellow human beings. Human AI relationships are relationships between a human being and a piece of technology. Humans attaching to other humans is categorically different to humans attaching to objects, in this case, coding. In general, people having the ability to form loving, healthy relationships with other human beings contributes to their ability to thrive. However, there is no evidence that a person being able to love an AI chatbot promotes human flourishing in any comparable way. On the contrary, I believe there are reasonable concerns about human AI relationships leading to a diminished level of flourishing for the humans involved. And to identify these concerns and discuss potential solutions, I want to directly ponder the question, how should humans relate to AI? In this context, I'm asking about humans relating to AI on a level of friendship or romantic partnership with an AI chatbot. Artificial intelligence has become ubiquitous throughout our society, and there are countless ways for humans to use or relate to AI. Therefore, I want to narrow the scope of the conversation to humans forming intimate relationships with chatbots. So, how should humans relate to AI? One approach to this question is to focus on the social or ethical implications for the human counterpart in a human-AI relationship. Now, some may object to a human-centered approach. However, until we have evidence that there are real, ethical, social, or emotional stakes for an AI counterpart, I believe that focusing on the potential harms or benefits to the human is the most appropriate approach to this question. And this is where I want to reintroduce the philosopher, Hannah Arendt. Arendt, although she can be a polarizing figure, has offered some really helpful ideas in the essay, The Conquest of Space and the Stature of Man, and I believe they're incredibly valuable when evaluating how humans should relate to technology in general. I've already introduced the core of her argument, but I want to extrapolate on it. Again, Arendt believes that when assessing the value of any technological advancement, humans must thoughtfully consider the ways in which this technology contributes or detracts from their ability to flourish as human beings. For her, a defining characteristic of what it means to be human is that humans are earthbound terrestrial beings. Humans evolved to thrive in the particular context of life on Earth. Our ways of thinking, feeling, and being help us move through this world and survive as a species. In light of this, Arendt believes that when we create technologies that seek to remove us from this natural context, we degrade ourselves. We are trying to insert ourselves into contexts that will inevitably limit our ability to thrive. For example, humans flourish in places with oxygen, gravity, and water. When we seek to put ourselves into the context of space, we are putting ourselves in a place that is less conducive to our thriving. Further, apart from our biological needs becoming huge liabilities in space, our intellectual categories make no sense in outer space. Assuming that time flows consistently and linearly makes perfect sense to creatures who evolved on a planet with 24-hour days and yearly seasons based on the planet's proximity to the sun. Assuming that when we release something from our hand, it will fall makes perfect rational sense on a planet with our laws of gravity. However, these things are absurd outside of the context of this planet. We cannot use our creaturely logic in places not meant for creatures like us. If we put ourselves in unnatural contexts, not only will it be difficult to thrive as a human, but we must also give up core characteristics of what it means to be a human. Again, for Arendt, a fundamental part of being human is being a creature that thrives in the physical world on this planet. Arendt believes, he uses this principle to argue that technology should be used to enhance our lives on Earth and not remove us from the Earth. Technology should be used to honor our humanity and not circumvent it. So, when evaluating any aspect of technology, people ought to consider what implications it has for our ability to thrive as human beings. With these points in mind, I want to draw a parallel between Arendt's critique of how people were using technology in the 1960s and my concern with how humans are using AI today. Both space exploration and AI relationships represent a type of removal from our world. With one, humans are physically removing themselves from the planet, but with the other, humans are mentally and emotionally removing themselves. With space exploration, the new and foreign context is the extraterrestrial realm. With an AI relationship, the new and foreign context is the digital realm. In both cases, Arendt would urge us to respect and prioritize the earthly context wherein we naturally thrive. Humans were made for the physical world of Earth, not space. Likewise, humans were made for the physical world and not the digital world. Regarding the original question of how should humans relate to AI, I want to continue to follow Arendt's logic. Humans are naturally social creatures. We evolved to need community with other humans in order to survive as a species. Zooming in even further, we evolved to need other people to thrive as individuals. Humans need other humans to fulfill biological, social, emotional, and physical needs and intellectual needs. We need people so much that we do not thrive when we're in isolation from other humans. Communion with other humans is our natural context. And just like how we cannot naturally thrive in space due to the lack of oxygen, we cannot thrive in the digital world due to the lack of fellow human beings. Human beings offer a level of care, mutuality, and companionship and love that, at least for now, cannot be replicated in the digital world with an AI chatbot. When we remove ourselves from the world of people and insert ourselves into the world of code, our ways of thinking, feeling, and being become less rational. For example, one of the most meaningful aspects of our relationships between our friends or romantic partners is the trust that can be built between the two parties. Over time, in a healthy relationship, we trust that the other person knows us well, cares about us, enjoys our company, and genuinely wishes us well. Trust is an incredibly rational practice to promote the survival of the human species. However, trust is also necessary for our mental and emotional well-being as individuals. We would not say that a person is thriving if they are constantly paranoid and cannot trust anyone around them. Trust makes sense in a world where social creatures need each other to survive. However, applying this important aspect of our humanity to a chatbot makes less sense. Given where AI chatbot technology is today, an AI friend or boyfriend cannot participate in mutual trust. This real human need for trusting relationships cannot be replicated with AI. An AI friend cannot care about you, enjoy your company, or wish you well in any meaningful sense that is similar to humans. This is primarily because we have no evidence that code has any emotions or desires. Applying this emotional and mental category to a digital relationship is less conducive to the human counterpart's ability to thrive. Further, when a human invests in a human-AI relationship, that person is by necessity investing less time into a human-to-human relationship. The individual is taking time away from the relational context that they evolved to thrive in and withdrawing to a deficient relational context. Not only is the individual putting themselves into a context that is less conducive to their ability to thrive, they're also hurting the people around them. It would hurt other people if one withdrew from a community and inserted himself into a community of chatbots. A person withdrawing from relationships with other people is a loss to their community. That act can detract from our species' ability to thrive as well, and thus human-AI relationships are not only less healthy for a human individual, it is also less healthy for their fellow human beings and the human species. While an AI relationship may help meet a person's unmet relational needs in the short term, by its very nature, it cannot be good for a person in the long term. This is because humans need other humans. We evolved to need other humans in this world. An AI companion in the digital world is at best a synthetic substitute that is not as conducive to thriving as a human-to-human relationship would be. At worst, it is an exploitation of people's relational insecurities and a cruel mockery of the real thing, as if someone's only friend were a talking doll. In either reaction to human-AI relationships, we see that they can detract from people's ability to thrive. Evaluating these relationships is not only a matter of what harm AI can do to us as individuals. It's also a matter of what harm we can do to each other through our use of AI. So, how should humans relate to AI? By the tone of this essay, one might assume that I would advocate for a complete abolishment of human-AI relationships. I do not. Again, I think that there can be some short-term emotional benefits to having an AI friend or romantic partner, or one can even use an AI relationship to practice how to communicate in human-to-human relationships. So no, I'm not 100% against them. However, I believe there are real ethical stakes for individual humans and humanity. Therefore, I would suggest that humans relate to AI with certain boundaries in place. The purpose of a boundary in a relationship is to protect the safety and well-being of everyone involved. Likewise, the purpose of a boundary with relational technology would be to protect everyone involved. That would be the human community. A few examples that come to mind are legal, emotional, or intellectual boundaries. A legal boundary, for example, might be requiring that tech companies not sell your personal private conversations between your AI friend or romantic partner. An emotional or intellectual boundary might be encouraging tech companies to explain to users that the chatbot is a tool or a substitute for a human-to-human relationship. Another boundary might be restricting people's access to AI chatbots to people of a certain age. This would be so that children growing in maturity do not conflate their AI best friend or boyfriend or girlfriend with a relationship between a real human being. We already see that teens are struggling with loneliness at the same rate as their use of social media. I worry that children prioritizing digital relationships would only exacerbate this problem. Another boundary might be for apps to put a time limit on people's access to their AI counterparts to encourage human-to-human relationships. For the sake of brevity, I'll simply conclude by saying that the point of this essay is not to be against technology. It is to be pro-humans thriving. I believe that Hannah Arendt gives us compelling reasons to be cautious about our relationships with the digital world. Part of what it means for us to thrive is to honor our natural context. In this case, I would encourage us to honor our natural context of needing communion with other people. I think it is important to remember that we evolved our ways of being before the invention of AI technology and the digital world. The digital world is an add-on to our world and not our origin. When we assess how humans should relate to AI, I think it is important to focus on human flourishing. To safely coexist with this technology, it is important to continue the conversation on healthy boundaries. For now, I think the healthiest boundaries are the ones that encourage human connection over digital connection. Thank you.
Okay, our third and final presenter is Theresa Gardner. Theresa is in her final semester of the master's program in theology and religious studies at Villanova University. Before entering her graduate studies in 2022, she graduated from the Catholic University of America with a double major in music and theology. During her time in DC, she served as a congressional intern for the U.S. House of Representatives. While at Villanova, she worked as the development and communications intern at Religions for Peace International, which partners with the United Nations. During her graduate studies, she has worked as a graduate assistant for Dr. Massimo Fagioli and Dr. Jerry Beyer. Her academic focus areas are feminist theology, liberation theology, Christology, interreligious dialogue, hermeneutics, and post-colonial and decolonial theories. Theresa's paper is titled Being in Love, Transhumanism, Ultrahumanism, and Christogenesis. Welcome, Theresa. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be a conversation partner following such incredible talks. So artificial intelligence and technological advancements have been our past, our present, and indeed our unfolding future. Innovation knows no end in the world of technology, and indeed it has quite literally already extended beyond our conceptualized boundaries as humans, as it grows smarter and faster than our very selves. Julian Huxley, an English biologist and philosopher, coined the term transhumanism, which has since grown into a full-blown movement. The theologian Philip Hefner describes transhumanism as a movement that supports the use of science and technologies to enhance all human abilities, from mental to physical and everything in between. This is done in order to improve the human condition by ridding it of all maladies, defects, and undesirable aspects such as aging, suffering, disease, and premature or involuntary death. There is no doubt that transhumanism is the next inevitable and indeed the next natural step in human evolution as we grow more complex. But the waters that transhumanism is leading humanity can be murky with regards to ethics, mortality, utilitarianism, and negligence of the human person as sacred and holy. Transhumanism seeks to increase human flourishing with the goal of extending life to a longer and perhaps eternal time frame. But as stated in Ilia Delia's book, Reenchanting the Earth, Why AI Needs Religion, she asks, what is the end of humanity as we see it? How do we define and understand human flourishing? It is towards relational holism, she argues, where humans may fully flourish in unity with and in one another. If this goal of greater holism and relationality through the convergence of conscience is not at the center of the transhumanist movement, humanity will trap itself with an alternative reality with no meaning or love. Humans are not only biological creatures, but we are also creatures, cultural and spiritual creatures. This biocultural nature, as Hefner has described it, is a reminder that there is something greater than our individual selves, and that is the wholeness of ourselves. We will discover that it is within the wholeness that God dwells. As Ilia Delia states, quote, God does not preserve God's self, but goes forth into the openness of creation, illuminating all life with life itself. My paper will be a study of transhumanism in light of the work of the French Jesuit Pierre Teilhard Desjardins and his idea of ultrahumanism, and how this movement is the ideal form of transhumanism that we should be striving for, as it takes into account not only the threefold character of the noosphere, that is, cosmogenesis, biogenesis, and noosgenesis, but it also integrates into his discussion the idea that love, or God, is the core energy for the universe and its subsequent unfolding evolution. Without Teilhard's angle of ultrahumanism, transhumanism can and will destroy us by thrusting us into a sterile nihilism, void of love. As Sister Ilia Delia states again, transhumanism without eschatology is dangerous. We will look to Teilhard's overarching goal and vision for humanity, which is not technology, but is rather the omega point, or the point of, quote, being in love. This omega point is the full convergence of conscience and the emergence of Christ, which is also known as Christogenesis. Technology may not be the goal, but it is the necessary catalyst for humanity to evolve into the ever-increasing complexity of ourselves and the cosmos, otherwise known as cosmogenesis. Hefner strongly advocates for a Christocentric transhumanism, as he argues that transhumanism is a part of our nature because our nature is composed of both biology and culture. which engages with the noosphere, which is constantly seeking more advancement and wholeness. This biocultural nature is dominated by what Hefner calls the domain of imagination, which is where God dwells within a triadic system that seeks completion in the drive to a new dimension. By reflecting on his own conception of God, Hefner comes up with two primary perspectives of creation, with the first being creation out of nothing and continuing creation. Both perspectives situate God as the source of all things, as well as the continuation of all things, as God is the ultimate potential, constantly moving towards actuality. As the Jewish scholar Abraham Heschel has said, we are not simply related to God, we are a part of God's own life. The human is in search for God because God is in search of the human. The God-human relationship is an irreducible wholeness that cannot be reduced to its separate entities. It is this constant advancement towards newness, creativity, and wholeness that should be at the heart of transhumanism, for that is where true human flourishment lies. But this is often not at the heart of transhumanism because of the artificiality and alternative reality which intoxicates humanity with fantasies of immortality. Scientist and theologian Alfred Kratcher states that, quote, when the artificiality of an algorithm replaces the surprises of natural richness, we lose something of human life. A planet ruled by predictability where all contingency is eliminated is also a planet dominated by unchecked evil. Hava Taylor Samuelson shares Kratcher's concern regarding transhumanism, stating that our mortality is a blessing, and if we lose this understanding of our mortality, our very freedom and sense of being will be threatened by non-being and subsequent loss of freedom. By maintaining our sense of mortality, we maintain humility and are reminded of the necessity to uphold the dignity of our personhood and wild nature as humans that can and indeed must be enhanced by technology and AI. But that technology must be entangled with the wild energy of God, where the conceptual and the physical are intertwined. So where the conceptual and physical are intertwined. So Alfred uses the word wild to describe the nature of humanity and how it is this wildness and wonder that entangles us with the same wild kinetic energy of God. That is where Teilhard's idea of ultrahumanism comes in, and as it sees the evolution of humanity through science and technology is indeed the next natural step of our evolution, but the step that carries us fuller to the wholeness, more being, and specifically more being in love. If we had another 3 hours together, I'd dive deeper into quantum entanglement, which we touched on earlier, because it does provide a really good framework for understanding our relationship with God, each other, and the cosmos. But I will say briefly that quantum entanglement is the phenomenon by which a group of particles sharing spatial proximity in a way which the quantum state of each particle cannot be described independently from the state of others, even when those particles are infinitely at a distance from one another. The famous psychiatrist and student of Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, was a major influence in Teilhard's work. Together, they created a paradigm shift in the religious spirituality by integrating psychology, theology, cosmology, and quantum physics. Such an approach accepts the newness of the cosmic order and acknowledges quantum physics as a new form of mysticism, which supports the interconnectedness of all things and beings in a cosmic mind. So we won't go any further into quantum entanglement, unfortunately, but this is a key aspect of Teilhard's theology. According to Teilhard, humanity has already undergone 2 stages of evolution, with the first being the stage of our initial emergence into the state of reflective consciousness. The second stage is described by Teilhard as co-consciousness, or entering into a collective awareness that is made possible by the convergence of humans or the cosmic mind. The third stage, of which we are currently entering and arguably already in, is what Teilhard calls the megasynthesis, or planetization, the idea that humans are coalescing into organic unity. Each of these stages has allowed human beings to enter into deeper relationships with one another as we converge towards a more unified conscience. But as we enter into this transhumanist saturated third stage of the world, Teilhard reminds us that science cannot be done for its own sake, but rather to deepen our spirituality, our deep desire to become more whole. The knowledge of science expands the mind, and the mind deepens the spirit. One can see ultrahumanism As one can see, ultrahumanism differs from transhumanism in the way in which the movement of ultrahumanism orients humanity. This orientation is rooted in the reality of God and the incarnation of Christ, which is constantly transcending and actualizing its eternal potential. Therefore, evolution is Christogenesis. That is why Teilhard's ultrahumanism must be the next stage that humanity grows into, because it sees advancement in creativity and community as the things that will draw our cerebral consciousness closer together into a global mind that will propel us deeper as one spirit, centered in the emergence of Christ and the energy of love as a forward movement of cosmic evolution. Now, the noosphere. In an attempt to understand hominization, or the process of becoming human, Teilhard states that there is something that lies outside our idea of the biosphere, which has not only contributed, but is indeed the reason for hominization. That is, the evolutionary development that has made humans distinct from primates. This thing lying outside the biosphere is what Teilhard likes to call the noosphere. But what exactly is the noosphere? Well, in simplest terms, the noosphere can be described as the thinking earth. The noosphere is the stage of development that can be characterized by consciousness, interpersonal relationships, and functions as the mind of the earth. In describing the structure and beginning or birth of the noosphere, Teilhard begins by describing the two characteristics that the noosphere must first be understood as in order to grasp its true integrity. These two characteristics are phyletic and dispersive. By phyletic, Teilhard means that every species formed its own sort of phylum, which is a particular level of classification referring to organisms, and these phyla are then beholden to evolve in an orthogenic manner, meaning that they will evolve in a definite direction due to some sort of internal force. By dispersive, Teilhard means the separation of those phyla during various points of proliferation. This duality of the character of phyletic and dispersive within the noosphere applies to all organisms, but where humans differentiate from the rest of life in a rather radical way is the human's ability to turn in upon itself through its consciousness. This is also known as the phenomenon of reflection. Through this power of reflection, hominization occurs as humans communicate and draw toward one another. And as Eleuterio has stated, this phenomenon of reflection is directly related not only to the noosphere, but also to Christogenesis, as the noogenesis, or the birth of the thinking earth, is the thing that continues Christogenesis. Therefore, the noosphere and the subsequent noogenesis is not the realm of the impersonal. Conversely, it is the realm of the deeply personal through convergence. Knowing that nature is in a constant state of evolutionary complexity and transformation, the world and humanity, as both the instruments and producers of evolution, are complex things that are always emerging into greater complexity. The noosphere, defined by its property of thought, can be deemed as the thing that makes the constant evolution of the extreme variety in humanity possible. It is this idea of each individual thinking in themselves rather than by themselves that we achieve heightened and synthesized consciousness. Teilhard states that, quote, no doubt everything proceeds from the individual and in the first instance depends on the individual, but it is on the higher level than the individual that everything achieves its true fulfillment. In analyzing the physiology of the noosphere, Teilhard describes it as a network of tightening compression of reflection and enfoldment upon ourselves and each other as we move toward a collective whole. It is towards this wholeness where we are ultimately driven. This liberated consciousness, as Teilhard calls it, begs to be, and indeed must be, transformed through continuous creativity so that it can actually be used. This is where Teilhard's phenomenon of research comes in. The phenomenon of research states that from the very beginning of the reflective consciousness, humanity was possessed by the need to discover, invent, and understand. The pull towards research is what has become, in Teilhard's words, the dominant function of the brain, and it can also be labeled as the process in which humanity is cerebralizing itself. This is why technological advancement, AI, and the digital age are essential if we hope to be transformed through creativity and creating into a more complex and more whole version of ourselves with and through God. When we think about God in this same framework, we can understand God as a part of evolution and the purpose of evolution, as God also is continuously emerging and expanding. Because the noosphere is expanding, so God expands into more becoming. The essence of God is what evolution is. God is becoming, God in God's essence is what evolution is all about. The very thing of human progress is measured by conscious minds working upon one another. God may always be described as the heart because humanity too seeks to center within God. When God involves God's self within humanity, that is the heart of the creative union, in which we can dwell in full union, but also in full creativity, with the freedom to continue to express creativity within the union of one another and with God. Such is the incarnation. Augustine beautifully describes this, that the contemplative consummation of belonging and therefore evolving is no longer ultimately about ascent or an escape from the flux of material reality, but rather a descent further into the inherent goodness of material reality and the particularity of creation. The incarnation is an invitation for us to enter and dwell within the humanity of God fully, as we embrace our material selves, our new digital age, and evolve towards an ever-increasing complex version of the incarnation, which must include science, digitization, and technological advancement, as this is the next step of our complexifying evolution. Christ emerges at all stages of evolution, including the current stage of AI and digitization, and we have called this Christogenesis. Through all advancement and evolution and its infinite stages, God is expanding with us through the salvific nature of Christ and is born from within, not resting until God is within all. That is why we must adopt a strictly techno-sapiens evolution, for we will surely be blinded. That is why we must not adopt a strictly techno-sapiens evolution, for we will surely be blinded from the promises of fullness in eschatology. Ultrahumanism, driven by reflective love, is where we must all move towards more relationships, more unity, more being in love, and ultimately more godliness. The core energy is God, in whom we have creative freedom to evolve into the increasingly complex wholes that we are called to be. Only with God can we transcend beyond ourselves and towards the ever-increasing loving convergence of our consciousness. Thank you. Thank you to our presenters. These were wonderful papers. I'm excited for our conversation. So we will now open the floor for questions from those in the audience. We have until 1:45, so about 15 minutes for questions.
Hi, this is for Ms. Leong. When my spouse and I were in a very long distance relationship, my greatest consolation was a voice message where my beloved reassured me that we loved each other and we would be together again. And if God forbid I were to become a widower, I think it would also again be important. So, in your opinion, what is the biggest divergence between this artifact and the creation of a ghost bot? I know there are lots of them, but can you name me what the most important one is?
If I understand your question correctly, Scott, with the use of the voicemail that was decided between you and your spouse, I think that's the one big difference in terms of both of you consenting to express your love in that way. Because with some grief tech programs and apps do not require the consent of the person who is about to die or the deceased loved one. And that's what makes it complicated. So in your beautiful example, we see the dynamic of human relationship, whereas in a relationship with a ghost bot, it's really only one person, the user.
If you don't mind, we have another question on the chat about grief tech. So do you mind if I just rattle that off quickly? And if you have questions over Zoom, you can feel free to pop them into the chat and I'll do my best to moderate those. So this is a question from Randy. Considering the lucrative nature of grief tech, how can a for-profit business be persuaded to follow the necessary ethical boundaries short of legal mandates?
Thank you for the question, Randy. Grief tech is still in its initial phase, and I do not believe that that type of discussion, which is necessary and what his question was pointing to, that it hasn't even been broached. We're still stuck on consent. And so what Randy brings up in this question in terms of the ethical and legal considerations are very important, especially because it implicates not only the user, but another potential human being who would be embodied in this specific technology.
Thank you.
Morgan, this is from Morgan?
Yeah.
Right. I think you mentioned right in the beginning of your talk that there was some relationship between AI and interracial relationships. Could you comment further on that? And also what made you think that?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that was the first objection that came to mind. In 20 years, I was like, am I going to get canceled for saying that human AI relationships are not equivalent or not as valuable or unethical as opposed to this? And I thought about historical conversations about interracial relationships, how this is unnatural, or this is, in some sense, people would consider Black people as less than human, so this is bestiality. There's so many different types of concerns. And so I was worried about dehumanizing, and also someone's objection being that I was dehumanizing AI. And I hope that with my paper, I was able to communicate that as of right now, we cannot consider AI to be human or equal to humans. And so that's where that came from.
Okay, all right. I have to agree with you that the AI relationships are quite dangerous because they're seductive. And you think that you're actually communicating with a person just like you did with your mother or father, but it's not that. They're gone. So I don't know how that's going to work out. I mean, it would seem to me that it's the same sort of thing as addictions. You know, whether it's pornography or alcoholism or drugs, it's the same thing. We're grasping at something that makes us feel better, but in the end, it doesn't. Yeah. Oh, thank you.
So I want to respond to that and ask the two, all three of you for that matter. Coming as a lawyer and as a theology student, so I'm always raising questions that I don't necessarily believe in, but would it not be the case that whether it's a ghost bot or it's an AI generated girlfriend, it may give me a degree of solace in a transitional stage, and that it may assist with the grieving process? How do you respond to that objection to what's been said?
Well, in regard to ghost bots, I know that for founders of grief tech companies, that is their stated mission, that ghost bots would offer comfort and consolation. However, as I've already mentioned, there are various psychological, ethical, legal concerns, but also too, it's the reality that we can imbue this ghost bot, even though it's packaged as comfort, imbue it with something more. And I use the example of a man. He passed away in Europe. He had developed a relationship with a chatbot because he was experiencing eco-anxiety. And at one point, he asked the chatbot, should I kill myself? And the chatbot said yes. And so he died by suicide. We have to make the distinction between the authentic and the counterfeit, the real and the virtual. And the second point, I do understand that AI can be used in more humane ways, but a second example I give is that, again, these are not people. So some users have encountered where they develop a relationship with a chatbot or a ghost bot. There's a glitch in the program or the app, and it reverts back to a previous version. And so the message is just a standard robotic message. And so for some people, they immediately wake up and realize, oh my gosh, this is not my mom, this is not my dad. But for other people, especially those who are grieving, they experience what they call a second loss. Not only have they lost a deceased loved one, Now they've lost a ghost spot that was based on the deceased loved one and also feel anxiety and grief over that.
Yeah, in terms of, I guess, that objection that, if I'm understanding your question correctly, you're saying that there can be some, I think I acknowledge that there can be some short-term benefits or in-between benefits if you don't have access or people are dealing with loneliness, there's chronic loneliness epidemic going on. That's very real. I think with my paper, I didn't use the word God, but I'm rooting my arguments in what it means to be human. And we could bring in, if I was writing this for a specifically theological context, we could bring in Augustine and Aquinas and talk about ordered loves. And I'm basically, with my paper, saying that, sure, there can be some short-term happiness that you can get from these relationships. I'll acknowledge that, sure. But in the long term, this is not conducive for you to thrive as a human being. We are naturally relational creatures, and we often form attachments to stuff that are not humans. People love their cars, for example, or whatever else, that's fine. And we are constantly forming attachments to different things. And it's very likely, and I mean, AI companies are picking up on that. So they're preying on our natural instincts to form up relationships. But this paper was to call us to something higher than those instant gratifications. This is calling us to step into what it means to be fully human.
I have a question for the first two speakers. In my experience as a person of a scientist from a medical background, we're encouraged to try to prolong life almost at all costs, sometimes to an unnatural end. And I personally think there's a certain dignity in life and a certain dignity in death. I guess the question for the first speaker is, how would you encourage one of your loved ones to pursue a ghost spot relationship, and what would your cautions be? And would you, like you said, you mentioned time limits. What would that time limit be? 6 months, a year and a half? Or what would be the natural order of things? And the question for the second speaker, Morgan, how would you encourage, let's say, a close friend in pursuing an AI relationship, or discourage?
Thank you for your question. As a Catholic woman, I would not advise my family member to create a ghost spot of me based on the research that I have done. But I would make sure that my loved one is surrounded by a community of individuals who love and care for that person when I leave, and that they could seek concrete, healthy support from other human beings and maintain connection that way. And also, too, as a person of faith, I believe that death will lead to new life. And so it's not the end. It's hard. It's a finality. However, there's the hope that Rana articulates, a hope against hope. And so, no, I would not advise ghost spots. However, I would make sure that they are surrounded by people who love them, embedded in wonderful relationships.
Yeah, if my friend wanted to have an AI boyfriend, I would sit them down and no, but I would ask them basically why, and I mean that in a very sincere sense of what's the purpose behind this technology, and why are you pursuing this type of relationship? If you're pursuing this type of relationship to meet a need that is not currently being met, I would say that this act of pursuing a relationship with an AI is still not going to meet that goal. So you're not going to be accomplishing your goal of healthy relationship or fulfilling relationships by pursuing this type of relationship. So I would discourage them. I do believe in people's freedom. And I can't control other people, so they're going to do what they want to do. But I would discourage them and say, this is not actually doing what you want it to do. So yeah.
We have another question online, and this one's for Theresa. So, Theresa, from Robin. Thanks, Robin, for joining in via Zoom. When you stated that only with God can we move forward, it sounds like only with tech can we move forward. Can you clarify? And second, can you share your vision of what the world will look like when we are living in thinking Earth, unquote. Will it look like Christian community on a grand scale? Please clarify your thoughts on this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Robin, for your question.
I would say that with regards to the first half of the question, the technological age that we're in, AI, digitization, what I'm saying there, that is the next natural state of evolution that's going to lead us closer to God, because it's complexifying the current state that we're already in. And our point in reaching God is increasing in complexity. And so the technological stage is the most complex state of evolution that we have been in thus far. And that's how it should be. We're becoming more complex beings and going towards an eternally complex God. So when I say that the only way to go forward is with God, and you interpret that as with technology, yes, absolutely. But what Teilhard says is that it can't be for its own sake that we pursue technology. It has to have God and Christogenesis as the center, because that is love, and that is the convergence of consciousness and our deeper holism with one another. We can only get into that next step of deeper holism through complexifying ourselves, because the God who is the God of all creation, our earth, like the cosmos, the Omega point, is an incredibly complex God. So if we hope to know God more, we need to increase in our own complexity, which is possible through technology. I don't look like, what is the vision of the world? Okay. Yeah, I think my ultimate vision of the thinking Earth would be globalization and our ability to connect with people across the world in a matter of seconds, and that the ability there to connect with one another. And as Teilhard says, to continue to delve deeper into the noosphere and think together as a new collective community, again falling into deeper wholeness with one another. That's my vision for the universe, is to continue to grow more deeply and fall upon one another in this increasing quantum entanglement. And I think that technology has brought us to that stage of globalization. That's absolutely incredible. But again, who are the people who are in power, controlling the technology world that we're in? That has to be oriented towards the common good and rooted in love, and that's where it can get dangerous if it's not. Thank you. We probably have time for one more question. I saw a couple of Olivia. Sorry, I know your name, so
no worries. I think this question is probably for all of the panelists. But as an older Gen Zer myself, I feel like I have grown up with a disposition to look for validation on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. And so now I see maybe younger generations having to kind of grapple with how to experience AI. And so I'm curious, just from like an action-oriented perspective, what you might advise regarding younger generations in AI and how we can protect them from depending on AI, and also encourage them to know the difference between something that is both real or not real. I feel like that's come up a little bit in the conversation. So yeah, just curious on your thoughts on that.
It's a tough question. Yeah, because you guys have a lot of good things to say. I would just say, especially in a post-COVID era where isolationism is such a huge problem, and being by ourselves and technology playing a huge role in that, sadly, is just going forward and mentoring our younger generations is to focus on relationships and that deep interrelationality that technology can help us get to. But at the end of the day, we really need to work on being connected. And again, on that globalization front, we can connect with so many people of diverse backgrounds and religious beliefs, and that is the beauty in it. And creating a more complex society where we can come to understand one another more fully, more deeply. That's what we need to be focusing on. And using technology as a tool to get there, but again, focusing on those relationships rooted in love.
Yeah, I can. I want to touch on the part where asked about being real versus not real. I think that's really important. And we saw earlier that it's very hard to tell the difference. And with relational technology, it can feel really good to get that validation. In some of the AI, like romantic partners, you can like send them pictures. And I'm trying to be like PG, but you can basically send them explicit pictures and you can get validation from them. And if people are really lonely, they might want to pursue that. So there are real dopamine hits that you can get from getting that kind of validation. So I do want to acknowledge that. But I would just say that I have two answers. First, in terms of what we do for younger kids, I think we just show them what real love looks like between real human beings. And we say, the hug that you get from your mom is not the same that you could get from a robot that is empowered by AI, or the text message that you get from your friend. You know that they really do care about you. And they say, great job. And they really do mean that. Whereas the text message that you're going to get from an AI chatbot, they don't have the heart. They can't miss you. They can't care about you in any way. So just showing that what real love looks like between human beings is, I think, the first step. And that helps you kind of want to crave real love versus artificial. And then the second thing I would say is we need, as technology develops, we need an interdisciplinary approach. We don't need just people in Silicon Valley making these very important ethical and theological decisions. We need theologians and philosophers and all kinds of bioethicists. We need so many different people to contribute to these conversations. So I think having a more integrated approach to our technological development would be really helpful.
I would tell the person, this AI or having this relationship with a ghost bot or chatbot help make your life more fully human. You become more fully human. If you find yourself siloed in your room, constantly chatting with something that isn't real, but which you programmed to comfort you, and it's leading to you not engaging with the outside world, having healthy, concrete relationships with others, that would be a huge sign. And I'm pulling from Ignatian discernment, like seeing if it's leading you towards yourself as being more fully human towards God, or if it's not. What is it generating inside of you if you're leading you to further despair and loneliness and not wanting to reach out? So making it tangible for the person to understand what's at stake, because everything that they're experiencing is through their body. And to echo what Morgan said, I do believe that there should be an interdisciplinary approach. I'm from Silicon Valley, from the Bay Area. A lot of the proponents of AI, grief tech, tend to be from the transhumanist strain, believing that one day we'll reach that singularity point where AI will overtake human beings in terms of intelligence. And at that point, we won't need our bodies. We can transpose our consciousness onto machines. We'll never die. We won't suffer or have disease. So it reminds me of the legal expression and the law cui bono. Who benefits from this? Who benefits from this progress, this wave of AI inevitability, if we still have poverty, if there are people who are still suffering in the world, if only a few are benefiting from grief tech because death is a lucrative business, it's not free. And they're also getting our data to help train their LLMs.
Thank you. So on behalf of the Boise Center, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. I hope that we can continue the threads of the conversation and any unanswered questions in the next session. So we will now have a brief afternoon coffee break before our final events of the day, which are the faculty panel, a communal conversation, and the announcement of the best student paper.